Alrighty, this is for the policy analysis presentation. So, wish me the best of luck. I've been fighting a nasty chest cold, so if I break into a coughing fit, I apologize in advance. I'm going to try to make through this because I just have to get it done. So, here we go. The policy issues I wanted to discuss and address were regarding mental health subjects. So, when mental health asylums were closed in the United States, it looks to me like a large gap in services was created. So, all of these individuals that had significant mental illness that had been poorly treated in asylums, warehoused in asylums rather than actually receiving treatment, were sent home to be with their families who had varying degrees of capacity to take care of them. So a lot of these individuals, um, really struggled when they got back home. Their illnesses were severe enough that families couldn't help them manage the mental illness. Treatment was challenging, and there was this gap where individuals who could be successful in outpatient treatment would probably be just fine. Their symptoms were mild enough, they could be successful with just outpatient treatment. For those individuals that their illness was so severe that they presented a critical danger to themselves or other people, then taking them into protective custody or having them committed to mental hospitals that still existed could still be done, but those cases were certainly not nearly as prevalent as those moderate to severe cases, that there wasn't really a good place for them. So, with this gap that's been created, it has started to cause some problems, I'd say. For me, in the law enforcement world, there is a substantial number of calls for service that me and my crew will respond to regarding individuals in mental health crisis. So, Layton, for example, is a city of approximately 100 to 120,000 people, depending on what time of day you're talking about. You do have Davis Behavioral Health, which has several facilities inside the city. You also have numerous inpatient treatment homes. You also have some transitioning homes for individuals with mental health issues. So there is a large population within the city that has significant mental health issues. Those people that have challenges and difficulties managing those symptoms, they tend to have a lot of interaction with law enforcement. Okay, they tend to have a fair amount of attention drawn to them. Excuse me. So my particular agency, as far as our patrol division goes, usually responds on anything from between 100 to 250 calls for service in a given day. And it seems to me that just within our city, the clientele has changed over the last 15 to 20 years. It used to be very rare for a shift to respond on a mental health crisis that might require a temporary mental health commitment. Now it seems as though my crews are going on them multiple times a day, if not multiple times a shift. So the prevalence seems to be increasing. I can't imagine that Layton is an anomaly. I think that's probably fairly consistent as cities tend to grow in population. So the problem that we're running into is that these consumers of mental health services that are moderate to severe really don't have anything that adequately seems to help. So, like I say, outpatient treatments, there are plenty of facilities for those. If someone is in crisis where they do present a danger to themselves or somewhere else, or someone else, excuse me, law enforcement can certainly take them into protective custody, transport them to an emergency room, or have the fire department transport them to the emergency room, and we can put, fill out a pink sheet and have them held, up to 72 hours for a crisis evaluation. Okay. The problem that we seem to run into, though, is that the ER does not want to hold on to these folks. Okay, they want to be able to continue to triage people and treat at speed, because the next patient in crisis is coming, and so they need beds. So they want to get people out of the ER quickly. Many hospitals don't have a mental health unit at all. So the nearest ones to me, for example, Davis Hospital does have one, but it's limited in size. Lakeview Hospital in Bountiful is available, but it's a fair ways away, and so we tend to utilize McKay-D up in Ogden. Even though it's in a different county, it's the closest and probably the best. So they do have at least, a lockdown mental health unit. Okay, but it does cause some issues. Because, like I say, the hospitals want to treat and release people as quickly as possible. So once these patients have had a chance to meet with a crisis worker, oftentimes they sign a safety agreement, basically promising not to harm themselves and to reach out for assistance if they do feel like they need to, and then they are promptly released. One of the worst examples that I've personally experienced was really unfortunate. A young lady attempted to die by suicide. Her attempt failed, but it was a clear attempt. So I transported her to the hospital, got her committed on a pink sheet, and later that same shift, just within an hour or so, I was back at her same apartment complex on an unrelated issue, and I saw her there. She'd already been released. And that kind of shook me a little bit, where it's like, hey, that was a clear attempt where she needs significant intervention, and she's already done just after signing, like I say, a safety plan. So I was a little disappointed and concerned. Okay. The gap continues as people, with increasingly problematic symptoms from their mental health diagnoses, they struggle. So our homeless population tends to suffer from significant mental illness, which makes sense. If you're struggling with significant mental health issues, you're probably not going to pay your bills really well. You're probably not going to, show up to work really well. You're probably going to have a fair number of interactions with law enforcement again that are not positive. So you end up with continuous legal issues, and they end up kind of getting shuffled in this revolving door of the legal system, rather than getting any significant treatment, because their families aren't equipped to help them, and there aren't enough facilities that are equipped to help them to provide them with the care that they need. Okay. These folks that end up falling through the gap in available services, they have tremendously higher rates of substance abuse as they self-medicate. They have tremendously higher rates of homelessness due to their lack of a functionality in society. Their interactions with law enforcement, like I just said, are significantly increased, especially this time of year, and in the wintertime. People start worrying about our homeless folks, which is a good thing. But they end up getting calls for service a lot to do welfare checks. And so our officers oftentimes come into contact just checking on their welfare, making sure they're okay, because they're living on the streets and it's cold. Most of those interactions are fine. Okay, they go smoothly. It is a welfare check, and that's all it is. But I always am concerned with people who are actively in crisis, having police officers respond, that it might touch off something that could turn violent or dangerous. So Something better certainly needs to be done. As I look at this problem and try to come up with solutions, I feel like social workers are in an ideal place to intervene and to interface with multiple jurisdictions, multiple disciplines, and try to address this issue in a more effective way. Okay? Social workers are adept at effecting policy change, raising funds, grant money, etc., and coordinating with other agencies in order to really get some momentum into addressing the issue. I think social workers tend to be better at it than a lot of other disciplines. Maybe we're all just people. So that speaks highly, I think, for us as a profession. Okay. What I would like to see is when we have a consumer in crisis. Okay. Someone who consumes mental health services, they are actively in crisis. It leads to law enforcement intervention. Okay, people will call the police. Well, they'll call 911, and the police will respond because they're the quickest and most available. If the crisis is dangerous enough, because, like I say, they are a danger to themselves or somebody else, unfortunately, the police are probably the best equipped to deal with that kind of situation. There's a broad spectrum, obviously, in the capacity of officers. Some officers are outstanding at crisis intervention. Some are absolutely abysmal. So it's unfortunately a bit of a crapshoot as to what you're going to get in your response. I always hope that officers do it well. One of the things that I do is I teach Introduction to Crisis Intervention at the Police Academy. I am a CIT certified officer. I maintain my certification, so I continue to work on those issues, try to maintain as much education as possible. And I think probably the biggest piece of it for me in my responses on those cases is I care about them. You can educate people all you want. You can train people all you want. But people tend to get good at what they care about. And for me, crisis response is important. It's meaningful, and I got into the business to save lives. And I think that is one of the most common ways law enforcement saves lives is in crisis intervention. So I push that hard to my people and instill that philosophy in them as well. Okay. When we do end up in that cycle where we are intervening in crisis, it is still something that I am very reluctant and cautious as I move forward. So there are some operating philosophies that can give officers some guidance as far as prioritizing what you will push deeper into a problem or where you will try to slow things down and be more patient. So the National Tactical Officers Association categorizes them as the priorities of life or safety. And hostages are prioritized at number one because they are at the most risk to immediate significant bodily injury or death. Innocent civilians are number two because, again, they could be in critical danger. And it's something that for law enforcement, we would be willing to walk into harm's way for that issue. Okay. Police officers would be number three. Okay. We want to make sure we prioritize hostages first, innocent civilians second, law enforcement is third. Suspects would be number four. And I don't want to mix up those priorities. As I address those issues, I don't want to put a suspect's life and safety ahead of an innocent person's life and safety. And so it can give me guidance on when I will be more direct. It will give me guidance on where I will put myself in danger. And so like you say, those issues kind of give us an ability to start judging those problems and looking at when we should and when we shouldn't push deeper into a problem. Why I bring that up now is regarding suicidal individuals. Historically, law enforcement has really sucked at how they deal with it. Okay, when we look at individuals that were depressed and armed, if they had put themselves in a position even where they were just home alone, but in possession of a firearm and reportedly suicidal, historically, police would contain that issue, try to negotiate with them to come out, order them to come out, and then if that person, refused that lawful order, then they would treat that as an armed, barricaded subject and, in ridiculous circumstances, maybe even call out tactical teams to try to address that issue. But they might force entry, forcing a confrontation with an armed individual, and oftentimes that suicidal person who was armed may get shot and killed by police and may shoot and kill officers as they respond inside that structure. So it's a lose-lose. Okay, the priorities of life and safety would dictate that that's a mistake. Okay, it motivates and pushes a change in our tactics. So as we look at those situations, if an individual is inside their own home, they are armed, they are refusing help, they don't want it, and we have offered that help, there's nothing pushing me forward. Okay, there's nothing that says I need to go kick that door in and force a confrontation, because that would screw up those priorities and put that person's life and safety ahead of my own, which doesn't make any sense. Okay. Now, what I can do is contain that issue, stay close, but try to communicate with them by phone or through other means at a distance, at a safe distance, and try to negotiate that issue, hopefully to a safe surrender and getting them the assistance that they need. But what I will not do, and what I continue to push my guys to not do, is try to fight or hurt someone in order to help them, because those two concepts are contradictory. And so law enforcement is slow to learn, but finally coming around, and that concept is getting better. Okay, but these poor folks who are in crisis still may not have anywhere for them to go. Okay, like I say, we have minimal intervention in outpatient treatment. We've got significant inpatient treatment if someone is dangerous enough, up to and including the state hospital. That's all well and good, but the sheer volume of these individuals that are in crisis, or that their symptoms are so severe that they can't be managed at a lower level, there is no place for them to effectively be. And so we see them in the homeless population often. We see them in jails often, and it's a tragedy that needs to be addressed. Okay? Arresting these folks for being mentally ill is ridiculous. Okay, and we've got to get over that. One of the challenges that we run into is when we do have a successful intervention and we get someone committed who is in significant need, oftentimes the inpatient facilities that are available are ill-equipped to deal with them, especially if they are resistant to treatment or combative. So like I say, Davis Behavioral Health has a facility in Layton, and it is all based on crisis response. Okay, for individuals that are significantly mentally ill. And when those individuals decide they want to fight with staff, when they decide that they want to walk out of the building and leave, okay, what have you, Davis Behavioral Health's approach has been to call law enforcement to respond. Okay, so these people may or may not be under mental health commitment. They may or may not present a current danger to themselves or somebody else, but the cops are responding. Okay, because they don't have the staff or facility to adequately house and effectively treat them. They can't effectively intervene physically. Just a couple of days ago, one of my guys was pretty upset about this because he doesn't want to get in a fight with this person to help them. And yet the people who it is their job to treat and interface with the mentally ill community, they don't seem capable of doing it. And so they're asking for someone who, yeah, we're good at dealing with resistant people to a degree, but we don't want to be doing it in order to help someone. So we continue to see that being an issue. There just isn't enough beds and facilities, and some of the training just seems to be inadequate for them to address some of those issues. Let me continue. What I want to see happen is an increase in the access and capacity for those individuals that need higher levels of care. Okay? A moderate to severe diagnosis should not doom someone to a life on the streets because there is no good place for them. Our homeless people, specifically in Davis County, struggle a lot where there is no homeless shelter here. There are no facilities here. We do have a receiving center, again, run by Davis Behavioral Health, but it is specific to substance abuse and mental health issues. So it's great, but again, it's also small. And so it fails to be able to adequately address that issue. And it is also predicated upon willingness to participate in treatment. So if someone is unwilling, they won't stay there. Okay. The counter positions that I see from people most often in my interactions with them, and this is in the law enforcement community, in the community in general, in politics, I oftentimes come across this idea that homeless people choose to be homeless. They're there because they want to be. And when I've spoken to people that are homeless and experiencing that, I have met some people that will say that they choose that as a lifestyle. I kind of find that a little bit hard to believe, that if the right set of circumstances came across and they had shelter, they had employment, they had food, they had stability, they had care, that they wouldn't choose that. Okay? Even these people that say that they want to be where they're at, I usually find that those people are really addressing, or at least expressing that they don't like what is available for them. They don't want to go to a shelter. They don't want to go to the receiving center. There isn't anything else. And so, yeah, I'm going to choose to be here instead. That makes more sense to me. Okay. So I think if we are to adequately and effectively interface with these folks, the right facility has to be there. The right kind of services has to be there. And the right approach in speaking with them has to be there to let them know that the help that they want is there. Excuse me. So one of the other arguments that I see is that, the asylums were closed for a reason. There was a lack of care. There was a lack of treatment that occurred in them. And that's a solid argument. Those asylums and the experiences that people had in them weren't effective. So I'm not suggesting we go back to that. But I do understand why people would be reluctant to have their loved ones put in a lockdown facility. Excuse me. Knowing what asylums of the past were like. And if that's their only experience or their only concept that they're going off of, I understand why they would be reluctant. Okay. The other argument is the one that I think always comes across any effective change, is the cost is unacceptable. This is not a cheap suggestion on my part. This is not inexpensive by any stretch of the imagination. It's going to cost a pretty penny. But that being said, my counter argument to that is this. Okay. This is a multidisciplinary issue. Okay, the mentally ill community interfaces with law enforcement, social work, um, politics, hospitals, insurance companies, um, across the board, the education system, healthcare system. So this is a problem that touches so many aspects of our society that this is a very expensive problem to continue to deal with it the way that we are, which is fairly ineffectively. Okay. In order to coordinate between all those different agencies and get the momentum required, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think social workers are in an ideal place to do so, to coordinate with those various agencies, to educate some of those individuals in those various agencies, especially when we talk about the political aspect of things. If you want to get the government rolling, you certainly need to educate them first. Okay, so like you say, social workers, I think, are in an ideal position to do so. The cost of building facilities that are intended and capable of housing and treating this population are expensive. But I think in the long run, that investment ends up being less expensive than the alternative of what we're currently doing, where these individuals are not, functioning members of society, where they contribute in employment, where they make money, where they pay taxes, where they, consume goods, typically. And that's a problem. That's an expensive problem. If you really want to get hospitals and insurance companies on board, how about we talk about getting these folks treated and back to a position where they can actually pay for insurance on their own and pay for medical care on their own, and hospitals and insurance companies aren't just eating those costs. Maybe that might get them excited. I don't know. Money usually does get them excited. Call me judgmental. Okay. Now, obviously, like I say, the asylums didn't work. Okay. The treatment was poor, but in a modern facility that is dedicated to moderate to severe mental health issues in this modern day and age, with proper government oversight, with proper education and preparation, I think a facility like that could function and have a much more effective interaction with that community. Being able to get these individuals into a safe place where they have adequate housing, where they can eat on a regular basis healthy food, where they can interact with their mental health workers on a regular and consistent basis, where they have access to medication that they need, and they're not just trying to survive on the streets and oftentimes self-medicating with illicit substances. It's a far more stable environment. In the long run, I think it's a cheaper solution to what we're currently doing, which hits so many aspects of our society in some really negative ways. I think it stands as an investment. So as I look at this issue, that's where I would take it. I would want social workers to get that ball rolling, interfacing between the politicians, okay, get the lawmakers on board, get grants available, get law enforcement on board, get mental health workers on board, get your hospitals and insurance companies on board, so that with a combined effort and a concerted effort, we might actually be able to more effectively treat these individuals, get them the help that they need, and get them to a point where they can actually safely and consistently get better. That's what I would like to see. Thanks.